Oh,
And it's a big issue, and it's interesting because the other argument that is made is that that students are not getting the services that they're asking for when the unions are very heavy. But what's so interesting about that is that the truth is the exact opposite. The perception is the more the unions are involved, that the less well that the students will perform, and that's just not, in fact, the case. The states that are most heavily unionized, like states like Massachusetts, et cetera, are the states with the best test scores. Now,
and other nations in Europe also
Yes.
follow the same pattern.
now, however, we all know, being educators ourselves, that at the end of the day, that the teacher is only one component in the education of a child. And there's so many other factors that come into play, socioeconomic factors, that are being ignored in this conversation.
Absolutely,
which is a real
absolutely.
issue.
And I should point out that it is not fair to just blame the failure of the students on the teachers alone. We grew up in different generations. So you have to look at the role of the parents in the education of their children. You have to look at the students' motivation level in the role of, in terms of their own education themselves. When I was growing up, we didn't have all these gadgets that distracted us. You went to bed, you got up, you read. Today, a child is bombarded by so many things that can distract.
Absolutely.
That is a factor that a teacher cannot deal with outside of the classroom. So I think we have to temper our criticisms of the teachers with the understanding that we are in a different era now. We need to bring about different ways of dealing with it.
Well, one thing that you talked about, the different generations. I know every semester when I begin, I ask my students to fill out a survey, a 2-page survey, and I ask them what math classes they've taken and how long has it been. And so I went in and searched around at a few states, California, Illinois. So for example, somebody could get by with, up until 2005 with 2 math classes in high school. And how well does that prepare you to go and operate in a college?
Absolutely.
When you looked at side by side what University of California wanted for the incoming freshmen and what the high school said you needed to graduate, you'd have to spend another 1.5 years in remedial education or taking pre-credit classes just to get there.
Very important.
And in Illinois, we have some of the same similar outcomes also.
Very important.
UIC, different schools want you to take 4 years of English, 4 years of science, 4 years of math, which is what I took back in the 70s.
Yeah.
So you have a diminished set of expectations to graduate high school.
Very important. I do want to stop you guys though, because I think we could do a 2-hour show on education and education reform. And I'm very interested in the issue. I want to come back to the union question, and I'd like to actually move off of the teachers' unions so we can have, I think, a larger conversation about unions in general. In the middle of this Wisconsin situation, we still have the NFL that is going through their own union struggle. And the owners are asking for more money. The way that the NFL works is that the owners get $1 billion off the top on revenues, and then that I think 60% of the revenues are then split with the players. Well, the owners want to not just get $1 billion off the top. They actually are asking to get $2 billion off the top now. Right. And they also want to extend the games in the NFL from 16 weeks to 18 weeks. It's 18 games. Mm-hmm. So we're facing this whole union question with a group of people who do make a lot of money. The NFL is a $9 billion industry every year. So here's the question. So we've made the argument that teachers are not, wealthy, but NFL players are. And the question becomes, should they have the right to organize as well? Should they be able to fight for their issues, or should we be sympathetic to the owners who, at the end of the day, people could argue that, that they should have maybe some higher level of rights than the players do. But I think this question, because it's happening right now in a completely different world, I think is as relevant as the teacher's question on unions. What do you guys think about this issue?
Well, I think this is to the core of American democracy. Decision-making at the workplace is an integral part of democracy, so that if you limit decision-making in the political realm and you deny it to workers collectively, you will find that companies or organizations that have collective bargaining and have given their own employees the right to bargain generally do better because once they reach a decision, that decision is owned by everyone. Now, negotiations are not sacrosanct. Contracts are not sacrosanct. If there is an economic problem, collective bargaining is the best way to resolve it rather than the way the Wisconsin governor is doing. Go and sit down, I'll tell you what to do. We have no money, don't come here. That will indeed rile many people across the country. So my own perspective on this is that whatever it is, people should come together at the table to negotiate. And in that negotiation, they should bring out various elements and reach a consensus that may not be satisfactory to everyone. But we allow organizations to function without the disruptions we are beginning to see.
But the disingenuousness continues because just as Scott Walker is just a puppet for moneyed conservative interests like the Koch brothers, the biggest 800-pound gorilla in the room with the NFL owners is that they haven't even let anyone look at their books. So they don't even know how much money they've made or not made. So this whole polemic is false to begin with because what are we arguing about? They take $1 billion off top and that's going to be promised whether or not there are games. And then we're talking about players. We just heard about the episode of Dave Duerson having a brain injury. So the average lifespan of a player or the career span of a player is about 3 years. Not all players make Julius Peppers money, $20 million a year. The minimum salary is about $300,000 a year. So there are some protections that players need while they're playing, but more importantly, after they finish playing.
Post-career healthcare expenses
That's what it's really about.
phenomenally expensive.
And so who do we care about? And I think this is the thing that we're really talking about within the context of Wisconsin, NFL, and all over the United States of America, and the world for that matter. Do we care about the capitalist or the worker? You know, and unfortunately, again, I think that the debate has been shifted from where it really needs to be, and that is that there should be more care given to the worker, from my humble perspective, because that is the real lifeblood of any institution, whatever institution you're talking about.
So how do we please both interests though? Because the truth is, you know, and this is, you know, Marxism at its best, that the owners and the workers are ultimately always going to be at odds because they have completely different goals at the end of the day.
Well, that will be difficult. I'm sorry.
Sure.
That will be difficult because where you have a segment of the American politics playing out the unions as antagonists because they support the other part of the American political sector. And I'm talking about the fact that unions are generally seen as supporting the Democratic Party. And then big business generally seen as supporting the Republican Party. Once you have this situation, it is very difficult to have a situation where the Republicans are going to be satisfied that whatever the unions are doing will promote their political interests.
Yeah, that's a very, very important point. And I think a lot of it comes down to, you know, just real issue of sympathy for these workers, if you will. Well, personally, I think that there could and should be more sympathy for teachers. I think we have a harder case, though, when we're talking about the NFL, and I think that that's part of the battle that we face. At the end of the day, probably the fans just want the games to be played and really are a lot less concerned about the issues related to the players because, truthfully, the minimum salary is what? $300,000, which is still, you know, light years beyond what most teachers are making. So,
well, there's two different ways to look at it economically. There's this idea of an efficiency wage, which is what Henry Ford did. If I pay a wage above prevailing market, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to attract workers that are going to satisfy my customers, not shut down my production line, not miss a day at work. And so there's two attitudes. There's the Walmart where I pay very close to minimum wage, and there's the Costco where I pay above minimum wage. I don't have as much shirking, that is slacking off on the job. I don't have as much malfeasance.
You mentioned Walmart. We don't have enough time to get in that one, but we should, right?
And the other way to look at it is like a tournament. How do you attract the best people? By paying the highest wage so they compete with each other, so that they compete to be CEOs, so the best and brightest compete to be professors. That's how you attract them, with this idea of creating a tournament. Like we all know there are a number of our colleagues that would like to be professors, but somehow they didn't make it and we did. Now, does that say something about us? Possibly yes or no. It is a tournament, so in that way, it is an efficient means to attract highly qualified people to go and perform functional services that are very important in a global society where we're working not in an information age, but more into a creative economy, because everybody has the information. We have to teach generative thinking. We have to teach critical thinking. both together, not just to break stuff up, but to come with new ideas in terms of generative thinking.
It sounds like what you're saying is that if we're smart and we're wise, we can appease multiple constituency groups. We can appease the owners, if you will, who are trying to live out the capitalist model.
And get the best product they can on the field.
Which we all understand that. And also appease the workers who are trying to, at the end of the day, pay their bills, have some job security, and buy their kids something, something nice after work.
But there has to be a transparent and even-handed, fair, earnest conversation to take place. And my fear is that that's not what's happening at the beginning of the process. These conversations are stilted in one direction, and you have this animus that's built up on both sides that doesn't have to be there. Again, I agree with your model, but I'm just afraid that doesn't necessarily work in practice.
We have to move to final thoughts, gentlemen. So why don't you guys wrap up and tell us, I think, in general, overall, at the end of this conversation, what are a couple take-home points? What does this come down to ultimately, and what can our audience leave with in relationship to the union issue? Why don't we start with you, Dr. Dima?
Yes. I think that the idea of unions appeasing employers would only make sense if the employers, as in the case of Wisconsin, want to be appeased. Over there, the employees have made some concessions which are flatly rejected by the governor. So it seems to me that ultimately what will happen is that people who support unionization in the public sector, we have to realize first and foremost that elections have consequences. They will begin to see Mr. Walker's carriage in Wisconsin as the consequence of the 2010 election.
I'm sorry, for the sake of time, we're going to have to go through quickly and try to get through.
I'm sorry.
No problem.
We got to get up. But I'd love to hear that. So we have to come to your class,
That's right.
and then we can listen
Chicago State
to that.
University,
Absolutely,
that's
it's the
right.
issue. Let's quickly.
So I would simply say that Americans need to wake up and understand that there's a conservative movement afoot that is threatening the very fabric of our nation, and we need to be politically active and economically aware about these changes and situate yourself accordingly.
Okay.
And
Professor
we have to be careful about the facts that we accept from people that are talking to us. So, for example, the state of Illinois wants to get rid of teacher strikes. Well, we only had 4 last year out of 869 districts.
That's huge.
And that's
it's a huge point.
0.04%.
Absolutely.
And it was in Pennsylvania, which had the worst, had 6 out of 501 school districts have a strike, which is less than 1%.
Thank you very much. We are out of time today. We could continue talking. This is a very interesting conversation and important as well. So thank you all very much. No matter what side you take in the Wisconsin budget debate, no matter how you feel about public sector unions, their role in the American workforce is an issue that will continue to reverberate across state lines and election seasons. We encourage you to start educating yourself now on this issue. It's one that will only grow in profile and volume in 2011. For the professors, I'm Ted Williams. Thank you for watching.